The primary purpose of Uniquely Human, the podcast, is to educate and inform. The views expressed during all episodes are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute educational or medical advice. Listeners should consult with professionals familiar with each individual or family for specific guidance.
Uniquely Human, the podcast, is produced by Elevated Studio. Music is graciously provided by Matt Savage of Savage Records.
Hi, I'm Dr. Barry Prezant, clinical scholar, researcher, and consultant on autism and neurodiversity, and a Brooklyn boy raised in the big city.
And I'm Dave. I'm none of those things, and I grew up on a farm in Illinois. But being on the spectrum myself, I have plenty of personal insight to lend.
And this is Uniquely Human, the podcast, a show that illuminates and celebrates autism and neurodiversity. Today on Uniquely Human, the podcast, we are so happy to have Dr. Elizabeth Laugeson with us. Elizabeth, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you so much. Good to see you, Barry.
It's great to see you. I think the last time I saw you was at a conference in New York City pre-pandemic, Brain and Language, I believe it was. I forget the exact title.
I think you're right. I think I went and saw Hamilton after that, too. I might have snuck out at some point.
You were able to get tickets. That's amazing back then.
It was a rainy Sunday, and it was a half hour before the show. Yes, I was very lucky.
That's great. Okay, so a little bit about you. Elizabeth is a clinical professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Biobehavioral Sciences at the UCLA Semel Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior, and is a licensed clinical psychologist. Elizabeth is the director of the UCLA Tarjan Center, University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities, and is the founder and director of the UCLA Peers Clinic, which we'll be talking about in much greater depth. And that is an outpatient hospital-based program providing parent-assisted skills training for individuals from preschool to adulthood. She also serves as the program director for the Predoctoral Psychology Internship Program in Autism and Neurodevelopmental Disabilities at UCLA, and she's trained thousands or tens of thousands of mental health professionals, educators, and families worldwide. As one of the only empirically supported and internationally recognized programs for neurodivergent youth and adults, Peers is currently used in over 150 countries and has been translated into over a dozen languages. And let me also say, a local parent-run and parent-founded support center called Community Autism Resources. Their two co-directors are both Peers certified trainers. And I trust them so much, and they made good choices. So you do a lot. And so I'm really curious about your history and the early influences that led to your career and what you're doing now.
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. I guess, everybody's got their story. I sort of have the personal story and then the professional, and I can share both. I don't know if you have a preference.
Let's hear both.
Why don't we start with the personal first then? Okay. So, in addition to being a clinical psychologist and a practicing psychologist, I also am a researcher. It's a very big part of my world. And there's a saying in research that research is me search, right? There's something there. If you're really passionate about what you're researching or what you're doing, there's probably a personal story there. Mm-hmm. And so, my journey is that I teach skills related to friendships and other kind of social relationships to people who are kind of struggling. And the reality is that before the age of 24, I'd lived in 21 different places. And by the time I got my doctorate, I'd gone to 14 different schools. So I had to know something about making and keeping friends and really kind of navigating my social world because it was changing all the time. Mm-hmm. And so fortunately, I was lucky enough that I was able to figure it out. I always felt like I was kind of decoding the social world that I was in. I got to figure it out first before I try to navigate it. And for whatever reason, I was fortunate enough to do that. And then I come across this group of individuals, particularly neurodivergent individuals, who really struggle with that.
Hmm.
And I understand the importance of friendships. And I also know what it's like not to have friends because I've been there where you're the new kid at school and you don't know anyone. And so I thought, what an amazing opportunity to teach what I taught myself to other people. And
Hmm.
so it's been, a wonderful journey. I don't think I would have ever known I was going to do this, when I was a child, but it all kind of makes sense now. But the professional side of that is that I always kind of knew I wanted to be a psychologist. I always, a lot of psychologists will say, I didn't choose psychology, it chose me. That's
Hmm.
definitely been my experience. But I definitely was going to go to grad school and become a psychologist. I don't think I realized that I would end up working in autism and in social skills and doing this type of research. In fact, I don't know, Barry, if you've ever had this experience where you thought you were going to do one thing and then you ended up doing something totally different.
Happens every few years.
Okay, well, I definitely had that happen.
Hmm.
When I was early in my academic career, I thought I wanted to do assessment, so
Hmm.
like testing and evaluations, helping with, diagnostic assessments. And so when I went to UCLA in 2003 as a pre-doctoral psychology intern, that was what I was focusing on. I was also really interested in the time in fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. I was
Hmm.
fascinated by this disorder because it's very prevalent, more prevalent than people realize.
Hmm.
Prenatal alcohol exposure is quite common, and it's a kind of it's static brain damage that doesn't go away,
Hmm.
and yet it's 100% preventable. And so I was very interested in sort of prevention in this area. So I was working with my mentor, Dr. Mary O'Connor, who had a CDC grant to test the effectiveness of a social skills program
Hmm.
for elementary school age children with FASD. And she asked me to be a part of it. Well, I thought I wanted to do assessment. So I offered to do the assessments for
Hmm.
this program. But she said, no, we actually have someone else to do that. So in my mind, I'm realizing she wants me to run a social skills group.
Hmm.
And I'd never even seen a social skills group before. Really hadn't even done a lot of work in group therapy. I think I was sort of group phobic, like didn't want to be in front of, groups of people talking. But I'm a trainee, I'm supposed to try new things. And so I ran
Hmm.
this child social skills group. And it was the best thing that has ever happened to me
Hmm.
professionally because it completely changed the trajectory of my career. And I absolutely fell in love with the process. And I
Hmm.
think the reason I love the process is that one of the strongest predictors of a mental health problems is not having friends, being socially
Hmm.
isolated or peer rejected. And on the other hand, one of the strongest predictors of good mental health is just having simply one or two close friends.
Hmm.
So this is sort of what I'm passionate about, and that's sort of what got me here. The autism piece is a little different. That part comes from the fact that the phone was ringing off the hook, Barry, from people who wanted this program for their adolescent teenagers on the spectrum.
Hmm.
And we didn't have anywhere to send them.
Hmm.
This is 2003 in metropolitan Los Angeles, nowhere to send them. And I realized there was a huge gap, and I wanted to fill that gap. And that's what we've been doing ever since.
Hmm. It really strikes me, just going back to your personal history, that with all of the changes you had to go through in all of the different schools, even though, and I don't know if it was international and just national, but even within the United States, there's a different culture
Yeah.
in each school. I mean, I lived in Mississippi for a year, years ago, and I grew up in New York City, and I'm
Yeah.
thinking about neurodivergent individuals
Mhm.
who have problems kind of having that social intuition of being able to observe what's going on and kind of extract the quote unquote conventional rules in those settings. So you must have run into that and helped you be so sensitive to those issues.
Yeah. I mean, it's all I knew. So I didn't realize that that was so unique. But it's very the social world's very complex, and I think that what we're trying to do in peers is to make it less complex, to just sort of decode the basics, the kind of what you need to know to make and keep friends. Things that some people almost seem like they come hardwired to do. I don't know if that's the case or not, but it can definitely be taught because there are actual sort of rules and steps that we're sort of following as we're interacting. We're doing it right now. We're giving each other space to talk and using our nonverbal kind of, language. And so these are things that we can decode and help if people want to learn the skills.
That's the key for me, is the people wanting to learn these skills. I'm a great case study in somebody who was hardwired not to be a social person. And it took me, a long time just to get to the point where I was comfortable hanging out with friends. Like the worst thing in the world was when I got close enough with somebody that they then invited me to a party. And then it was like, oh, is this what friendship is? Oh, no. It's like, now I have to go. So, but I learned, that's what my whole book is about, is learning sort of the methods and the behaviors of what my mental model of a worthy husband should be and a worthy dad should be, and then learning those behaviors and then doing them, and just practicing them and getting it wrong sometimes and getting it right. But that's why the Peers program has been I reached out even before the book was published, and I think I was like, hey, can I send you an advanced copy of my book? Whatever you're doing at this Peers program really seems like something that I could have benefited from. And so it's creating opportunities for people to go and try to plant their feet on the ground and, like you said, learn the ways of the social being. And by the way, it's not just for people on the spectrum.
No.
I think a lot of people could definitely benefit from some social training.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I appreciate what you're saying there too. I kind of feel like in being in this field for 20 years now and in the social skills kind of arena, I kind of feel like as a society, we're sort of losing our social skills. They're changing. They're always changing and evolving. But I think the more that we interface with our electronics, the more difficult it becomes to know how to interact with people in person, face to face. And yet people still have that desire. Maybe that will change. Maybe the desire will be gone at some point. But at this point in time, I think it's hard for many people. You don't have to be neurodivergent to be struggling with friendships or social relationships a lot. And I thank you for mentioning too that Peers isn't just for neurodivergent individuals. A lot of my research focuses on autistic youth and adults, but really the program's for anybody who wants to learn some of the strategies that we have to offer.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I just realized we've been talking about Peers, but we have not said what the full acronym stands for. Would you like to do that, Elizabeth?
Sure. Yeah, Peers is an acronym. It stands for the Program for the Education and Enrichment of Relational Skills. And, Peers started as a parent-assisted program for teens on the autism spectrum. And as I mentioned, it's expanded a lot now. We don't just work with autistic individuals, and we also don't just work with adolescents anymore. We have programs for adults and for preschoolers. And we also have programs not just focused on friendships, but also on employment and dating. So we've really expanded quite a bit over the years. And it's always about identifying where's there a need and where's there a gap. And I'm all about trying to fill the gaps with evidence-based programs, right? Things that we can show actually are working, that are neuro-affirming, and that include autistic individuals and different stakeholders in the process of creating these programs. So they have a say in how this is done.
And that's an important point, because I did want to raise the controversial issue that the term social skills has been the recipient of many critiques now. And you just kind of pointed to that. And I always say, when people say, oh, social skills, that's bad stuff, I said, there are so many different ways to define that and to look at what we're talking about. Yeah. And in Peers, and you just alluded to the fact, and please expand upon it, that the participants have a lot of say as to what's going on.
Oh, yeah.
This isn't about teaching masking. This is about helping people navigate through what, in many cases, they wish to be able to navigate through.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we've always, before the term like neurodiversity was really very popular. I mean, this was something we were practicing already in terms of making sure that whatever we were proposing to do was what people wanted, number one, and making sure that we were being respectful of the fact that, using different social strategies is always going to be a choice. Right. We're not going to force this on anyone. We're not going to tell them what to do. And in fact, we use a very kind of collaborative, sort of Socratic method of getting at what are the different strategies, right? So we're not telling, the people that participate in our program, they're sort of telling us, but we do it in kind of a method where we sort of act out things that might be maybe socially risky or things that are socially helpful. And we talk about that and we sort of decide collectively what's maybe working and what's not. But all of this is very much founded on neurodiversity. And I think neurodiversity, of course, we all know it means that people have different ways of thinking. And we need to respect that role of neurodiversity when we're learning new social strategies. And the differences that we see, that doesn't mean that they make us less than or more than. They're just differences. And there's a lot of strengths in neurodiversity. And Peers is definitely more of a strengths-based approach. We don't talk about, what people are really struggling with. Honestly, we just give them strategies that they can maybe use if they want to. And we kind of collaborate on that. But, each week, the way that we do this, if you're kind of curious about this neuroaffirming strategy, and it sounded like you were, each week we kind of present these different strategies for friendships, for example, and relationships that have shown to be either socially helpful or socially risky, right? And we know that through research, like certain behaviors can be helpful, others can be kind of risky. But learning and using those strategies should never be about changing the person. That's kind of the idea behind masking and camouflaging, is like somehow you're changing that person. It should really just be about enhancing social interaction so other people can appreciate us for who we already are. But ultimately, learning and using the skills has to be a choice. And, we even go so far as having a neuro-affirming pledge at the beginning of all of our lessons. And I could geek out and tell you what it is, but, I'll stop and try to use my social skills and let you talk.
Well, geeking out is welcome. I'll leave it up to you.
That was actually considered one of the names of the podcast before we went with Uniquely Human.
Really? Geeking out? I love geeking out. It's the best. In fact, that's very, very specific to autistic folks too, right? Like they like to geek out on things and because they're super interested. So I love it.
Prior to our dear friend, Steve Silberman writing Neurotribes, he became famous because of an article called The Geek Syndrome.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I got married because my wife likes geeks. So listen, I'm pro geek.
Yeah.
I'm pro geek too.
There's one other thing I wanted to interject quickly. You mentioned how important social connections are for a person's mental health and for kids and teens and young adults. Of course, me being a little bit on the senior end of life here, what we hear all the time is quality of life is so connected to maintaining those social connections. And people in the latter years of their journey, very often become isolated and they lose those connections. So this is lifespan that we're talking about.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, there's a ton of research that shows this too. And it's not just for autistic individuals or neurodivergent folks. It's really anyone. Peer rejection is one of the strongest predictors of depression and anxiety, right? It's very much correlated with things like substance abuse. In school, poor academic performance, and even early withdrawal from school. And at its worst, suicidal ideation and suicide attempts are strongly predicted by peer rejection and social isolation. And yet, we know that just having one or two close friends kind of does the opposite, right? Just one or two. You don't need a lot. Just one or two close friends is negatively correlated with things like depression and anxiety. You're less likely to be depressed or anxious if you just have one or two friends. You're more likely to feel good about yourself, have good self-esteem, more likely to be independent. And also, those friendships can really buffer the impact of stressful life events. I'm thinking of
Mm-hmm.
COVID. Like imagine what it would be like to go through COVID and this lockdown, right? This global lockdown and not have any friends. What might that feel like? I mean, and I think a lot of people got a dose of what it might feel like to not have friends when they couldn't see their friends. They realized how important those relationships are. So it's not a small thing. To me, helping people with their relationships is another approach to treating mental health problems
Mm-hmm.
and preventing mental health problems.
I think just personal experience, and this might be a tad off topic, so then I'll let Barry course correct us back into the whole thesis of this episode. But uh, one of the things, Dr. Laugeson, that I've noticed in myself is not knowing, like, I almost need a written affirmation or some kind of, not to sound hokey or ridiculous, which this will, but almost like a contract or something saying like, we have gone from acquaintances now to friends, right? Like this, we've crossed that bridge, or should I still treat you like an acquaintance? And fortunately, I've got Kristen to kind of be that navigator for me. I'll be like, this guy I met at work, he's pretty awesome. We've had lunch a bunch of times. We've gone mountain biking together. Do I text him like we're friends, or what do I do here? What's the move? And she can always sort of, guide me through there like a seeing eye human. But I just I wonder if a lot of people who are on the spectrum would would also benefit from a clear delineation or even a guide sitting next to them, like a almost like a caddy on a golf course, saying like, "Yeah, you guys are friends," or "No, no, don't get that familiar with that person. They're not ready for your full effect."
Yeah. Yeah, I think what you're describing is what we describe as a social coach. Just happens to be in the form of your wife, right? Your
In
life.
my case, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, but for a lot of our young people that come through our program, they come with a parent or another family member, a peer mentor, even job coaches and life coaches. And this program isn't really intended to stand alone without that additional support, because we all need that. We all, by the way, have social coaches. It's not just
mm,
neurodivergent individuals. I got lots of social coaches. They're called my friends.
Mm-hmm.
They're called my family. I'm constantly checking in and I teach this stuff for a living, but I need a little reality check sometimes too. So
sure.
that's totally normal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we need to normalize a lot of this for the people that we work with, that we all kind of like help each other figure this stuff out. Dating is a really good example of that. Nobody dates alone. Like you're always
Yeah,
checking in with your friends and family trying to figure out what is happening. Relationship.
yeah. I
that
don't I
that
don't even want to know what dating would be like nowadays. Like you can't it's not so when I was growing up, the cartoonish version of dating was the "Hey baby," and but you can't just roll up on somebody like that now because I don't think you ever could, frankly.
I think you're
But you know
right.
what I mean? Like, it can be kind of a landmine now where any sort of attention that you're giving somebody, speaking of social media and electronics, any attention you're giving somebody, a lot of younger people get really freaked out now. They're like, why is this weird guy saying hello? It's like, I'm saying hello because you work at the hotel and I'm trying to check in and you're standing behind the desk. Like,
Yeah.
sorry for making eye contact. But anyway, Barry, you were about to say,
Yeah, this just reminds me of one of the very funny comments that another dear friend of ours who's been on our podcast, Dr. Stephen Shore, shares. And that's when he was beginning to, when a young woman was showing interest in him, and I think it was in the early college days, and he said, now, is this just heading towards friendship? Is this heading towards a romantic relationship? Those were the initial two choices. The third choice was further investigation needed.
I know.
That he needed to collect more data to figure it out. Uh,
yes.
but I do want to steer us back to something you were talking about just a few minutes ago, Elizabeth, and that is the issue of social isolation, the issue of having negative social experiences, which brings us to the very, very sensitive topic of bullying.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned to you before we went on, There are a lot of bullying prevention programs now and experts, but not that many who have expertise in both autism and the causes of bullying, and even more important, the approaches to address bullying. So if you could share some of your knowledge and experience with us, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, this would be what we call a common interest, you and I have, because I'm also very passionate about the bullying, epidemic, because it's really what it is.
Mhm.
And I think that, as you mentioned, there's a lot of anti-bullying programs out there, but the research suggests that most of these programs aren't very effective.
Mhm.
And it's important to think about why that might be. And I think it's because a lot of times we fall short with these programs. If you think about the goal of an anti-bullying program, what's the goal? Well, the goal is to eradicate bullying. And they'll put signs up in the hallway that say like bully free zone, like at school. And like that's going to stop the bully. Like, oh, can't bully here. It's a bully free zone. Like it's not even that practical to think that, you could totally eradicate bullying. And even if you are able to minimize it and reduce it, there's still going to be kids that are being bullied. And
Mhm.
where the programs don't go, typically, is how to handle that if you're on the receiving end of the bullying. I
Mhm.
think that it's complicated, especially for schools, because then they would have to acknowledge that it's happening, and that there's actually, that sometimes parents will say, oh, there's no bullying in my kid's school. They
Mhm.
have an anti-bullying policy. And I'm thinking, oh my God, you have no idea. Of course there's bullying going on.
Mhm.
It's just not being talked about. So I think we need to also address what to do if you're the victim of
Mhm.
bullying.
And,
And,
and
a lot of adults do that, but they don't always give the best advice, unfortunately.
yeah, and sorry to interrupt, but isn't it complicated also because there are many different forms of
Yes.
bullying? Some
Yeah.
can be very, very blatant and direct, and anybody would know what bullying is right away when you see it. And other ways it could be more subtle, off the radar screen. So,
Yeah.
what are your experiences around different forms of bullying?
Yeah, I mean, there's a nice body of research that actually has defined the different types of bullying, and essentially there's four types. I sort of categorize them into two categories, and then kind of break it down from there. There's sort of direct bullying, which you kind of alluded to a second ago, and more indirect forms of bullying. So the direct forms would be things like verbal bullying or teasing, right? Name calling. It's probably the most common form of bullying, although there's another one that's catching up. There's physical bullying. That's also direct, right? And that's the more aggressive kind of bullying, hitting, kicking, pushing. Could also be stealing from someone or pulling practical jokes or
Mhm.
pranks. That's physical. Those are both direct forms of bullying. Then you have the indirect forms, right? So that would be things like cyberbullying, which definitely is on the rise, major problem, but it's happening like kind of not right in our face necessarily. I mean, it's on your phone, maybe in your face, but they're not, it's indirectly happening. And then there's also another type that's called relational or social bullying.
Mhm.
And that's things like rumors and gossip, which are also kind of happening behind your back. Those are four very different types of bullying behaviors.
Mhm.
So, would you suspect that the strategies that we need to kind of navigate those behaviors might be different?
Mhm.
They're completely different.
Mhm.
Completely different. So the first thing you do have to think about when you're handling bullying, addressing it, is what type of bullying are we talking about?
Mhm.
And then we look at the strategies.
So you alluded earlier to the negative impacts, and if, wish to expand on that a little bit because you know it's not just hey, listen, stiff upper lip, just forget about the bullying, don't let it bother you. There are very deep and longitudinal impacts that happen that we know of.
Yeah. I mean, you don't need to read a research paper to know that, right? You don't need to, I mean, you just experience it. People will hold that, will carry that kind of bullying experience well into their later life. And it's just something that kind of doesn't necessarily go away for people. There are a lot of really negative impacts, particularly for autistic youth.
Mm-hmm.
Autistic youth are 9 times more likely to be
Mm-hmm.
bullied more than any other disability
Oh,
group,
goodness.
9 times more likely. And a lot of estimates show that upwards of like 96% of autistic teens would say that they've been significantly bullied within the last 6 months. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, if you're working with a kid or you are someone that is on the spectrum, there's probably stories there about being bullied. And we know that they have really negative consequences. And so it is something we have to address. No one knows particularly why kids in the spectrum or adults in the spectrum are more likely to be bullied. There's theories about that. One is that, a lot of times our autistic youth, they maybe have fewer friends. And who do the bullies want to pick on? The kid
Yeah.
who's alone or in a group. What do you think?
Yeah.
Easy target. Yeah.
Or the easy target. Exactly. So that's one issue. Another is the issues around like social competence. Like, what do you do if you're being
Right.
bullied? Well, sometimes, our kids will do exactly what the bully wants, right? Think about that. If someone's teasing me, what do they want me to do? They want me to react. They want me to get upset or mad or tease back. And if I do that, I'm making it fun for them. And they're going to keep teasing me. It's going to be fun for them. I made it easy. We have to get into the mind of the bully. That's not something that's that easy for a neurodivergent person to do, to get into the mind of the other person.
No.
And then the other piece that might be happening here too is that autistic youth get less support from their peers when they're being bullied. And think about that, of the anti-bullying programs that are out there that are like moderately effective, they're the ones that include what's called bystander support. So bystander support, what do you think that is? Getting kids to stick up for each other, right? That's going to be a much more effective program. However, sadly, a lot of times autistic kids don't get that bystander support. So then people will say, well, why not? And there's lots of reasons, but one reason I think is that a lot of times those peers don't know that person's autistic. And they don't know that the things that they're doing that other people might not like policing people, telling them what they're doing wrong, or barging into conversations and being off topic, or doing whatever it is that's part of their autism. They're doing that because they're neurodivergent, not because they're trying to be willfully annoying. And that's what gets misinterpreted. People don't know they're autistic, so they think they're doing these things to be annoying. So I think part of the bullying dynamic is creating empathy and understanding. And part of that is talking about our differences and explaining them, taking control of the narrative and letting people know who you are and what is different about you and why, in whatever way you're comfortable with. But I think until we start having honest conversations about these differences, kids are going to get rejected and they're not going to have people sticking up for them. And it could just is perpetuating a lot of these issues.
Well, the tricky thing too is, again, when we're talking either in a neurodiverse, we'll just use classroom because, by the way, I think this also extends very much into the corporate world where I live. But in the classroom, let's use this as an example. Adolescents, you don't even need to be an adolescent. You can be younger than that, elementary school. The social gamesmanship of sticking up for this person, you can only do it so many times before you think like, I don't want to be lumped in with that person because I'm starting to see a real trend here. And it becomes sort of an avalanche of, erosion of your support system when your friends are looking elsewhere and saying like, I'm going to, they don't say I'm going to join another friend group, but you can perceive them leaving your sort of circle, your tribe. And it's like, oh, there go two more of my people. Oh boy. And it starts to feel like not only was I picked on by somebody like targeted, but now I also am feeling abandoned and there's processing that. And then there's got to be shame and it becomes a very messy snowball.
Yeah, I think what you're describing is the fact that we all have a reputation, among our peers. And you get your reputation also based on who you hang out with.
Yes.
And so what ends up happening is that a lot of neurodivergent kids who are maybe engaging in things that other people don't like and don't understand start to develop a reputation. And their friends start to become afraid of that reputation because they don't want to get it by association. So it becomes very hard for those kids to make friends when that's happening. So that's part of what we have to teach them is how to address that. And also a big part of that is how to self-advocate, like how to talk about differences and in a way that other people can understand and appreciate so that they don't have to, you don't have to, you get to control the narrative. It's not a term I normally use, but I'm kind of
Hmm.
liking it right now because that is kind of what it is. When you share those differences with others and you explain them, and you also in the process, you need to find strengths in those differences. Everybody's always focusing on negative stuff, the
Hmm.
challenges. And I'm going straight for, and this is why, this part of me, it makes me a better friend.
Hmm.
Find the strengths and make those strengths in your neurodivergence an asset to whoever you're talking to, whether it's someone who's a potential friend, a potential partner, and a potential employer. I don't think we focus enough on the strengths. There's a lot of
Hmm.
superpowers in there. I think for a lot of folks, if they can harness that, their autism becomes their superpower.
Hmm. The term that I like to use for that is by helping all the students understand, or all the adults also, the strengths as well as the areas of need for support. It really levels the playing field, because not only does it increase everybody's self awareness that, hey, wait a second, there are some things I'm not so great at, or I act kind of funny or different under these circumstances, but it also just helps everybody appreciate kind of what Dave and I refer to as the complementary abilities, that maybe it's good to be with somebody who's better at something than you are,
Mhm.
and vice versa, because that kind of comes together. And that's the value of neurodiversity. Um, if,
Absolutely.
if we do that, if it really, really levels the playing field. One of my favorite examples of that is a youngster, number of years ago, who was on the spectrum, and he was in third grade, and he was hyperlexic, so he could read and decode better than any of the other students, but he would scream when there were loud, unpredictable noises. And I
Mhm.
was visiting the classroom, and this young man, his name was Chris, he let out a big scream, and a little girl came over to me and said, Chris gets upset sometimes and screams, but he's the best reader in the class.
Oh.
It kind of just really levels the playing field at all age levels, and it's so important. And
Yeah.
so you've alluded to strategies both for individuals who may be neurodivergent, and then system-wide approaches. But bullying could be one of the most difficult things that families experience indirectly. And in my experience, it's one of the most common reasons, among a number of reasons, that we see school refusal when it
Yeah.
gets so difficult at all. So, if you could navigate through those different levels, you already alluded to some of
Yeah.
already, but
Yeah.
the system-wide approaches, the individual approaches, and then helping
Yeah.
families.
Absolutely. I mean, I could go on and on. I'm going to try to be brief, but one thing
Okay.
I'll focus on is probably the simplest strategy that we teach in peers, and it relates to handling teasing.
Hmm.
Okay, so I want to ask you both, what do you think that most young people are told to do in response to teasing?
Well, I was always told ignore it,
Ignore it. Yeah.
Yeah.
but then nobody said how.
Yeah. That's the most common thing we hear is they're told to ignore it or walk away. And for younger kids, they'll be told to tell an adult. And
Right.
then I ask them if the strategies work. And do you want to guess what they say?
Not
Not at
really.
all, not
Nope,
remotely.
Yeah.
not even. Because remember, we have to get into the mind of the teaser. What do they want us to do? They want us to react. They want us to get mad, to put our and also, if you're not reacting at all and you're not saying anything, you're also making it really easy for them, right?
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's sort of fun for them. And so you're more likely to get teased. If I ignore, they're going to keep teasing me. If I walk away, they're going to follow me and keep teasing me. And if I go tell someone, now they want to retaliate against me because I tried to get them into trouble. So those are not what we call ecologically valid strategies. You can do that. It's your choice. Everything's your choice, right? But kind of risky to do that. It hasn't been shown to be very effective. What is effective, what is helpful, is a very simple strategy that a lot of young people use. And what we need to normalize here is that everybody gets teased. Doesn't matter how many friends you have, how popular you are, everyone gets teased. It's how you react to it that
Hmm.
determines how significantly, severely, chronically. So, what people do is they'll give this short comeback that shows that what the person said didn't bother them. And they'll say things like, whatever, or yeah, and am I supposed to care? Is that supposed to be funny? They'll roll their eyes, they'll shrug their shoulders, like, and it embarrasses the teaser, right?
Hmm.
Because you're acting like what they said was kind of stupid and it doesn't bother you. And it's not fun for the teaser,
Yeah.
right? That is the simplest strategy we could possibly teach to teach someone just to say whatever. And there's different ways of saying it. Some people will have more of an attitude, some people will sound more bored. Like if I had an attitude, it would be like, whatever, right? Or if I'm like bored, I'm like, whatever. And it doesn't matter. It's whatever my personality is, whatever I'm feeling like that day, it's not that hard. And those are the kinds of strategies that we should be teaching in an
Hmm.
anti-bullying program. And I got to tell you something. I've done an all-school anti-bullying program with this in it.
Hmm.
And the teacher said, "Well, will this work if the bully knows that that's what the person's doing?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I guess we'll find out. I hope so." So we do this program so the bullies know about the strategy too. It's all school. And so the kids would get bullied or teased and they would say, whatever. And then the bully would say, "Oh, that's just one of those peers things." And then the other kid would say, "And your point is?" Totally worked. Totally worked.
Yeah.
So that's what we need to be doing. We need to be giving real helpful strategies, not what we think is going to work, but what we actually know in reality.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, because what is the I mean, violence shouldn't be the answer, but human beings are across the board generally terrible in a lot of cases. And what's the saying? It's illegal to slap an asshole. It's not illegal to be an asshole. So what we used to do is take matters into our own hands. You get into fisticuffs or whatever, and then the dominant strength would be the one who was proven right. But in this case, obviously it's massive progress that we're not behaving like that largely anymore. And so
Hmm.
now having these concrete ways to shut
Hmm.
someone down and shut them up is fantastic.
And I don't want to overly generalize. I think, at least for some of the kids we're talking about in the school setting, they're very good at learning little scripts. So it could be something that is practiced in terms of having those kinds of reactions, which is really important. Yes.
By the way, I'm not a big fan of scripts,
Oh,
but
okay.
this is probably as close as it gets because we don't come up. I don't create these sayings. This is just what kids say and
Hmm.
adults as well. But they don't work in every situation. That's why I don't like scripts, right? Because like you might know your
Yes.
lines, but the other person doesn't know theirs. So the comebacks need to make sense. If
Hmm.
someone said to me, "Liz, you're so stupid," and I said, "Am I supposed to care?" I'm agreeing with them. That's not right. And it doesn't work in every situation. It's probably why I love a good whatever, because
Hmm.
whatever sort of works in pretty much every situation. And you also don't stick around and take more. You'll give like a couple or a few comebacks, and then you can walk away. I love to walk away on an anyway. That's a good one to walk away on. But in
Hmm.
general, like you got to think about what you're saying in response too. So there's a bit of a script element, but in general, we need to make sure that the comebacks make sense.
Hmm.
Yeah, well,
Great.
that's the nature of like jazz improvisation is you have a library of language and go to quote unquote scripts. The creativity is knowing when to apply them in certain
Yeah.
situations.
Yes. My goodness, and you could think of all those situations, so many. But this is good advice, and I'm sure so many of our listeners who are parents, will think a little bit differently in terms of how they can support their kids, based upon that advice. So Elizabeth, you've devoted your life and your career to supporting neurodivergent people. What's kind of the future for you? What are you turning your attention to, or what are you excited about right now?
Well, as the saying goes, the future is now. So there are things that I'm working on now that I'm very excited about and plan to devote many more years to developing and sharing with others. But employment is another area where a lot of neurodivergent folks are struggling
Hmm.
finding and maintaining employment. And I just don't find that acceptable because these are, job seekers that have unique talents and lots of strengths to bring to the workforce. And so I want to help to fill, that need. And part of that is in developing soft skills related to finding and maintaining employment. Things like choosing a career and writing a resume and interviewing, navigating workplace culture, things that, Dave has mentioned. It can be very complicated.
Hmm.
That's one side of it, though. The other side is creating a more supportive work environment, employment
Hmm.
environment that's going to be neuroaffirming and also very inclusive of people who maybe think differently. And so working with employers too on providing supports within the workplace and identifying all of the benefits to working with neurodivergent talent. I think a lot of times we don't talk about that. I mean, this isn't a charity, right? Like there's a lot of strengths that neurodivergent people bring to the workforce. So kind of coming at it from different approaches is something I'm really passionate about. And so I have a program called Peers for Careers. We're in our second randomized control trial now.
Hmm.
Our first randomized control trial happened during COVID, made it a little complicated, but we still enrolled over 100 autistic adults who were job seeking and got really great results, even during a global pandemic. So excited to see what we do with this next study. And then also, I'm very passionate too about developing programs that work on other types of relationships, like dating. I alluded to earlier, can be a big issue for a lot of autistic adults. They often want to have romantic relationships. They maybe want to get married, but they don't know how to.
Hmm.
And they often don't end up in those relationships, or they sometimes can get in a little bit of trouble with some of those relationships because they don't know how to let someone know they like them. So this is another area I'm working on. It's called Peers for Dating.
Hmm.
We also are in our second randomized control trial for this study. Also enrolled people during COVID. It was a very complicated time. Dating during a pandemic. Imagine, like, it was complicated. But we're really excited about these programs and excited to share more.
As you
And
should be. You know why?
hmm.
Because again, all the work, all the scaffolding is on the building usually of the neurodivergent person. Like there's not a lot of scaffolding and work and being done on the people who make life hell for the neurodivergent person. So those people kind of get this pass through high school, then college, then their 20s, 30s, 40s, and the next thing you know, you're their coworkers, and or you're their you go to church with these people, and you're like you haven't had to adjust your behavior at all. I've had to learn how to live in a world of people like you. So the when you turn 18, my point is the lack of a better word, the dipshits don't go away. In fact, they seem to multiply. So being able to apply these things, and also your needs, your values, your understanding of who you are and what's really important to you as a person changes as you get older. And so what you needed at 15 is in terms of coaching is a lot different than, hey, when you go and you start love bombing somebody and you're showering them with flowers and you're showering them with poetry and this and that, that's actually quite repellent. But you don't want to be not authentic either. So let's figure out a way to harness this.
Hmm.
Right.
That becomes massively useful in your 20s, 30s. So, or teens even. So anyway, I love that this carries forward. And if you ever need um, a participant, I'm sure you've got a long line of applicants, but if you need a workplace participant right here, I think my wife would frown on me being a dating participant, but for sure the workplace would be good.
So Dave is signing up. There we go.
I love
That's
it.
right.
I love
Gratis. I'll do it free of charge.
Great.
it. Oh, thanks,
Elizabeth,
Dave.
thank you so much. This has been wonderful. And what you just outlined as kind of the future directions that you're excited about are also the cutting edge issues, I think, in the field right now and in supporting people. So congratulations on that. And thank you so much for that. And thank you for being with us. It's been terrific.
It's been fun. We've been geeking out. It's been amazing.
And that's called a callback. That's a reference that.
Right. So take care and be well.
Thank you. You as well. And thanks for the invitation to talk with you.
Sure.
Cool. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Great.
Thank you. Happy holidays.
Yeah, same to
You
you.
too. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.